Orchestrated original memoir story with character constraints and authentic American voice. Orchestrated original memoir story with character constraints and authentic American voice. The casket cost more than my first car, and my brother picked it out without asking me. I remember standing in the funeral home showroom under those soft yellow lights, the kind they must buy specifically to make grieving people feel calm and broke at the same time, and watching him run his hand along the lid of the mahogany one like he was a man who knew quality. $8,000. His wife stood beside him nodding, holding her little leather folio where she'd been writing everything down all week. And when the director asked who would be settling the bill, my brother said, without a beat of hesitation, "It'll come out of the estate." The estate. Like our mother was a corporation. Like the woman who'd spent the last 6 years of her life in the back bedroom of my house. The one I fed and bathed and read to, and held through the long nights when her lungs felt like wet paper, was now just a number on a spreadsheet that he'd flown in to divide. I didn't say anything. That was my mistake, I think, looking back. I'd gotten so used to swallowing things that week that I'd forgotten my voice still worked. Let me back up. I was 38 when my mother got sick the second time, and by then I'd already learned that being the one who lives closest is its own kind of sentence. My brother had moved to Phoenix when he was 26, chasing a tech job and a girl, and over the years, the distance had hardened into something he wore like armor. He called Mom on Sundays. He sent flowers on her birthday, the FTD kind that show up half-wilted in a box. He flew in for Christmas every other year and stayed at a hotel because, he said, our childhood home gave him allergies. My sister was different. She wasn't malicious, just absent in the way some people are absent, drifting through life on a current of new boyfriends and half-finished degrees. She lived 2 states over and meant well, and meaning well, I would come to understand, is a currency that spends like nothing at all. So it fell to me. It always falls to someone, and it fell to me. When the doctor said Mom couldn't live alone anymore, I had a choice to make, and I want to be honest that I didn't make it nobly. I made it the way you make most of the big decisions in a life, which is to say I sort of stumbled into it because the alternatives were worse. Assisted living near us ran $4,000 a month for a single room, and that was the budget option. The kind with the carpet that smells like industrial cleaner and the activity board that just says bingo in every square. Mom had her Social Security and a little teacher's pension, maybe $1,900 a month altogether, and her savings would have covered about 2 years before she'd have to spend down to qualify for Medicaid and end up in a facility that took whoever the state sent them. My husband and I talked about it for one night. He's a good man, Theo, the kind who fixes things without being asked and remembers which mug you like. He looked at me across our kitchen table that night and said, "She raised you. She can have the back room." And that was that. We converted the office. We put in a walk-in tub. We did it on our own dime. $11,000 I pulled out of a retirement account I'd been building since I was 22. And I never asked anyone to pay me back because back then it didn't occur to me that there'd be a back to pay. For 6 years I was a daughter and a nurse and a short order cook and a chauffeur to 4 different specialists across the metro area. I cut back my hours at the dental office where I worked the front desk, then cut them back again and finally went part-time, which meant I lost my health benefits and had to go on Theo's plan, which meant we paid more, which meant the vacation fund became the medical fund became nothing at all. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand the shape of what I gave, because later, people who weren't there would try to tell me the shape was different. Here's what those years actually looked like, the part nobody puts in the cards. They looked like 3 a.m. and her voice down the hall, thin as thread, calling a name. Sometimes mine, sometimes my father's, who'd been gone 15 years, sometimes the name of a dog she'd had as a girl in the 40s. They looked like the particular weight of a grown woman's body when she can't help you lift it, when you've got your arms under hers and you're both crying a little, her from the pain and you from the helplessness, and you make a joke so neither of you has to say what you're thinking. They looked like a stack of bills I learned to read upside down. They look like missing my own daughter's junior recital because Mom spiked a fever and you can't leave a fever, you just can't. And Maddie said it was fine, Mom. It's fine in the voice kids use when it is the opposite of fine. and I have never fully forgiven myself for that night, and I don't expect to. But there were good days too. I want that on the record. There were afternoons we'd sit on the back porch with the radio playing the old standards she loved, and she'd close her eyes and move one hand a little like she was conducting, and she'd tell me stories I'd never heard, about the boy she almost married before my father, about the year she taught fourth grade in a town with one stoplight, about how scared she was the day I was born because she was barely 22 and didn't know the first thing about keeping a person alive. On those afternoons, I didn't feel like a martyr. I felt like the luckiest person alive, getting to know my mother as a woman and not just a parent, while there was still time. My brother flew in twice in those 6 years. Twice. And both times he stood in the doorway of the back room with his hands in his pockets like the carpet might reach up and bite him, and he'd say, "You're a saint, you know that? I couldn't do it." Like it was a compliment. Like it absolved him. I used to think it did. I was generous in my heart back then, before I knew what was coming. I figured everybody loves in their own way, and his way was just from a distance, and who was I to judge? Then Mom started to slip in earnest, the last winter, and that's when my brother got interested. He started calling more. Not me, Mom. He'd call her cell, the one she could barely operate, and I'd hear her on the other end of those calls saying, "Yes, honey," and "I know, honey," and her voice doing the thing it did when she wanted to please someone. I didn't think much of it. I was too tired to think much of anything by then. I was sleeping in 90-minute stretches and living on coffee and the kind of resentment you don't even let yourself name because naming it would take energy you need for other things. He flew in that March, alone, and said he wanted quality time with Mom. I thought, finally. I thought maybe the end coming had cracked something open in him. I left them alone for hours. I went and got my hair cut for the first time in a year. I sat in that chair and let a stranger wash my hair, and I almost fell asleep from the simple animal pleasure of being taken care of, and I came home feeling lighter than I had in months. He brought papers, I found out later, while I was at the salon feeling human for 90 minutes. My brother sat at my mother's bedside with a folder from an office supply store and walked her, gently, through signing a new power of attorney. Financial and medical, both. Naming him. He'd had it drawn up in Arizona by a lawyer I'd never heard of and notarized at a UPS store by a clerk who probably notarizes 40 signatures a day and couldn't have told you whether the woman in the wheelchair understood what she was putting her name to. She didn't understand. I put money on it. By that March, my mother had good hours and bad hours, and on a bad hour, she'd have signed her own death warrant if you'd handed her the pen and called her a good girl. I didn't know about any of this. That's the part that still makes my face hot when I think about it. He sat in my house and ate the dinner I cooked and complimented Maddie on how tall she'd gotten, and the whole time the papers were folded in his bag and he flew home Sunday night, having quietly made himself the gatekeeper of everything my mother had left. She died in May. On a Tuesday in the early morning, with her hand in mine and the window cracked because she always liked the sound of the birds before sunup. I'd like to tell you it was peaceful, and in a way it was, but mostly it was just quiet and then quieter, and then a silence in the house I'd never heard before. Because for 6 years, there'd always been the sound of her breathing somewhere in it. I called my brother first. I'll never understand why. Habit, maybe. Oldest sibling. The one you're supposed to call. He answered on the second ring like he'd been waiting, and he said the right things, and then within about 90 seconds he said, "Don't sign anything at the funeral home. I'll handle all of it when I get in. I've got it set out so it's clean." Clean. There's that word again. I should have heard it. Grief makes you deaf to the things you most need to hear. He flew in the next day with his wife, who I'll call my sister-in-law because that's what she was. Technically, by law, though she never once acted like family in any way that counted. She arrived with her leather folio and a roller bag and an air of having things to take care of, and she took them over immediately. She got on the phone with the funeral home before she'd even hugged me. She picked the mahogany casket. She picked the flowers and the catering for after and the announcement in the paper. All of it good taste. All of it expensive, all of it, as my brother kept saying, coming out of the estate. And it was at the funeral home, under those yellow lights, watching them spend my mother's money like it was a game show prize, that I started to feel the first real prickle of something being wrong. Not grief. Grief I knew. This was sharper. This was the specific feeling of being managed. I asked my brother that night, after Maddie had gone to bed and Theo was doing dishes to give us privacy, what exactly he meant by handling the estate. I asked it gently. I was still giving him the benefit of the doubt, which in hindsight I'd been doing his entire adult life. He smiled at me, and it was the smile he used to give me when we were kids, and he talked me into doing his chores. Mom set it up so I'm the one managing everything, he said. It's actually a huge favor to you. You don't want to deal with all this paperwork, trust me. You've been through enough. He patted my knee. I've got it. The house, the accounts, all of it. I'll make sure everybody's taken care of. What do you mean, the house? I said. And he told me. Mom's house, not mine, her own little ranch across town that she'd kept all these years and rented out to cover her property taxes. The house I'd grown up in was going to be sold, and he'd be handling the sale, and the proceeds would be distributed appropriately. And when I asked what appropriately meant, he got vague in a way that men get vague when they've already done the math and don't like the look on your face. I want to tell you, I exploded. I'm not an exploder. I went up to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I felt the whole architecture of the last 6 years of my life rearrange itself into a shape I didn't recognize. And the shape was this. I had been a fool. Not because I'd given. I'd give it all again. Every night, every fever, every missed recital. I mean that. I'd been a fool because I'd assumed that giving was witnessed. That somewhere a ledger was being kept by someone other than me. And it wasn't. The only ledger was the one my brother had drawn up at a UPS store in Phoenix, and on it I didn't appear at all. The funeral was beautiful, I'll give them that. The mahogany did look nice. A lot of people came, more than I expected. Neighbors and former students and women from Mom's old church group. And a dozen of them found me afterward to say, some version of you took such good care of her. She told me about it every time we talked. She said you were her angel. I held it together for all of them. I came apart exactly once in the church bathroom for about 4 minutes, and then I fixed my face and went back out and accepted a casserole from a woman whose name I couldn't remember. It was at the reception that the neighbor found me. Mom's old neighbor from the ranch house, Gwen, a sturdy woman in her 70s who'd lived next door for 30 years and had been the one to call me. Way back at the start of all this, to say your mother left the stove on again, honey. I think something's going on. Gwen pulled me aside near the coffee urn and held both my hands in her dry, warm ones and said, I have to tell you something, and I don't know if it's my place. She told me that the previous fall, before the bad winter, before my brother's quality time visit, my mother had come to her one afternoon with an envelope and asked her to keep it safe. She made me promise, Gwen said. She said, Gwen, if anything happens to me, you give this to my daughter and you make sure it's the daughter who took me in, not the son. You understand me? She was very clear. She had her wits about her that day, sharp as anything. I've had it in my dresser drawer 6 months. I almost forgot with everything. She squeezed my hands. Come by tomorrow. It's yours. I drove to the ranch house the next morning before I could talk myself out of it, before my brother could fold me back into his plans for the day. Gwen made coffee and we sat at our kitchen table, the one that looked out at the house I grew up in, and she went to her bedroom and came back with a plain white business envelope, slightly bent, with my name on the front in my mother's handwriting, just my name. Not my brother's, not my sister's, mine. Inside were 2 things. The first was a letter, 3 pages, in the wavering cursive that had gotten worse over the years, but was unmistakably hers. I'm not going to tell you everything it said, because some of it belongs only to me. But the heart of it was this. She knew. She knew exactly what she was costing me, and she knew exactly who was showing up and who wasn't. She wrote that she'd watched me lose my career an hour at a time and never once heard me complain. She wrote that she'd lain awake worrying about my retirement, the account she knew I cracked open to build her bathroom. She wrote, and this is the line I have memorized, that a mother is not supposed to have a favorite, but a mother is allowed to have a debt, and mine is to you. And then she explained the second thing in the envelope, which was the part my brother didn't know about, couldn't have known about, because she'd done it without him. The ranch house, it turned out, was not in the estate at all. 2 years before she died, on one of her good stretches, my mother had gone to her own lawyer, an old family attorney named Mr. Halloran, who'd done her and my father's wills back in the 80s and was still practicing out of a strip mall office near the highway, and she had quietly placed the ranch house into a transfer on death deed, a ta deed. It's a legal thing, more common than you'd think, that lets a piece of property pass directly to a named beneficiary the moment the owner dies, outside of probate, outside of the will, outside of any power of attorney, which, by the way, ceases to mean anything at all the instant a person dies. The power of attorney my brother had hustled her into signing gave him control of her affairs while she was alive. It evaporated the second she stopped breathing. And it never had a thing to do with the ranch house anyway, because she'd taken that off the board entirely 2 years before he ever showed up with his folder. The beneficiary on the deed was me. The envelope held a copy of the recorded deed, stamped by the county, and Mr. Halloran's business card, and a sticky note in her hand that just said, "Call him, he knows everything. It's done. Don't let your brother bully you. I love you. Mom." I sat in Gwen's kitchen and read those pages, and I cried in a completely different way than I'd cried in the church bathroom. That had been grief. This was something I didn't have a word for. It was the feeling of having been seen, finally, all the way down, by the one person whose seeing mattered, and of learning that she'd been protecting me even as I thought I was the one doing all the protecting. She'd done it in secret because she knew that if my brother caught wind of it, he'd have found a way to talk her out of it or talk her into undoing it. She'd outmaneuvered him from her sickbed. My quiet mother, who I'd been spoon-feeding applesauce, had played a longer game than any of us. I called Mr. Halloran from the car. He remembered Mom immediately, remembered my father, remembered me as a teenager who used to come into the office to use the photocopier for school projects. He confirmed everything. The deed was valid, recorded, airtight. "Your mother was very specific," he said, and I could hear him smiling. "She came in here under her own steam, answered all my competency questions like a champ, and told me she wanted to make sure her brother, your brother, couldn't get his hands on this particular property. Her words, she said you'd earned it 10 times over." He paused. "There's a little more too. You should come in." The little more was an account. Not huge. My mother was a retired school teacher, not a tycoon, but a CD she'd opened decades ago and let roll over and named me as the payable on death beneficiary. The same airtight mechanism, the same end runaround probate and power of attorney both. $41,000. The exact rough amount, give or take, that I'd poured into her care over 6 years out of my own accounts. I don't think that was a coincidence. I think my mother sat down with a calculator at some point and figured out what I'd spent and quietly arranged to pay me back, and never said a word so I'd never refuse it. Now, here's where I have to tell you about the confrontation, because I know that's the part you want, and I'm not going to pretend I'm above wanting it too. My brother found out 3 days later when the realtor he'd already contacted, the one he'd lined up to list the ranch house, called him back to say there was a problem. The property had a TO deed on it and a recorded beneficiary who wasn't part of the estate, and any sale would require that beneficiary's signature. He came home from that phone call the color of a bad oyster. He cornered me in the kitchen. His wife stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, the folio nowhere in sight for once. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question, an accusation. "Nothing," I said, and it was the truth. "Mom did it. 2 years ago, with her own lawyer." I slid a copy of the deed across the counter to him. "I'd made copies. I'm not a complete innocent." He read it. I watched him read it 3 times. The way you reread a text that can't possibly say what it says. She wasn't competent too. She was completely competent 2 years ago and you know it, I said, and her lawyer documented it. And it's recorded with the county. And it has exactly nothing to do with the power of attorney you slid in front of her in March when she didn't know what day it was. I watched that land. I watched him understand that I knew about March. It's done, I said, which were her words, and saying them in her words felt like having her standing behind me. It was done before you ever started. His wife said something then about how this was going to tear the family apart, and I remember turning to look at her. This woman who'd picked an $8,000 casket with my mother's money before she'd hugged me, and feeling absolutely nothing but a vast, clean tiredness. The family was already in pieces, I told her. You just didn't notice because you were busy holding the part with the money in it. My brother tried over the following weeks to make noise about contesting it. He called a lawyer. The lawyer told him what Mr. Powes, Halloran had already told me, which is that a properly executed, properly recorded transfer on death deed by a competent grantor is about as challengeable as gravity, and that to even attempt it, he'd have to prove our mother lacked capacity 2 years before her death, against the documented testimony of her own attorney, and that he'd spend more on the fight than the house was worth and almost certainly lose. He stopped returning my calls after that, which was fine, because I'd stopped making them. My sister, to her credit, called me when the dust settled. She'd heard a version from our brother that cast me as a schemer, and she'd heard the real version from Gwen, who apparently called everyone. God bless her. My sister said, I should have helped more. With Mom. I knew it was all on you and I let it be. And then she said the thing I hadn't known I needed to hear. He's wrong, you know. About all of it. Mom did exactly the right thing. We're closer now than we've ever been, my sister and I. Grief did that. Or maybe the truth did. Something cleared a path between us that had been overgrown for years. I kept the ranch house. Theo and I talked about selling it, and the money would have been welcome, but in the end, I couldn't do it. I rented out still, like Mom did, to a young couple with a baby who send me a Christmas card every year, and the rent covers the taxes and a little besides, and twice a year I drive over and sit in the driveway for a few minutes and listen to the birds before sunup. Because she always liked that sound, and now so do I. The $41,000 went back into my retirement account, every dollar of it, into the account I'd cracked open to build her a bathroom. It felt right to put it back where it came from, like closing a circle. I'm 39 now. I'll be able to retire someday after all, it turns out. My mother made sure of it from her sickbed, in secret, with a calculator and a lawyer and an iron will. I never knew she had until she was gone. People ask me, the ones who hear this story, whether I forgave my brother. The honest answer is that I don't think about him much. Forgiveness implies a wound that's still open, and mine closed a long time ago. The morning I sat in Gwen's kitchen and read 3 pages of wavering cursive and understood that I had been loved precisely, specifically, and completely by someone who'd been paying close attention the whole time. You can't stay angry when you're carrying something that full. There's no room. What I think about instead is her hand moving in the air on the back porch, conducting music only she could hear, and the boy she almost married, and the town with one stoplight, and the fact that she trusted me with the last and best secret of her life. Not the money. The secret underneath the money, which was that she'd seen me, all the way down. I keep her letter in my own dresser drawer now, in the same plain white envelope, and some nights when the house is quiet in that particular way, I take it out and read the line I have memorized, the one about a mother being allowed to have a debt. And I think, no, Mom, you had it backwards. There was never any debt. There was just a daughter and a back bedroom and a window cracked for the birds, and 6 years I would not trade for every dollar in the world. She knew that, I think. I think she knew I'd say that. I think that's exactly why she made sure, quietly, in secret, that I'd never have to.